My brother is mad at me because I don't support him when his wife cheats on him for the third time. But now he's homeless because she asked for a divorce. Hello everyone. This is a pretty long and complicated story, so I'll do my best to explain everything clearly. My name is Amante, and I'm 32 years old. My younger brother, Ethan, is 29. We grew up in a very close-knit family, but things have gotten complicated in recent years due to the problems in his marriage. Ethan met his wife, Amber, 8 years ago in college. They seemed to be the perfect couple, always laughing and publicly showing their love for each other. They got married shortly after graduating, and everything seemed to be going well. However, about 5 years ago, Ethan called me devastated, telling me that Amber had cheated on him with one of her co-workers. He was heartbroken and didn't understand how it could happen. After many tears and discussions, they decided to try to work on their marriage. About 2 years went by, and everything seemed to have improved. Ethan told me they were happier than ever, and that the incident with the infidelity had strengthened their relationship. They even started talking about having children. But unfortunately, 3 years ago, Ethan called me again in tears, telling me that Amber had cheated on him again, this time with one of his friends. It was a huge blow for Ethan. He was depressed for months, unwilling to leave the house or do anything. Eventually, after much insistence from me and our parents, Ethan decided to forgive Amber once more and give his marriage another chance. Honestly, I couldn't understand how he could do that after being cheated on twice. I tried to make him see reason, but Ethan refused to listen to me. He said he loved Amber and couldn't imagine his life without her. I have to add that every time he came crying about a new infidelity, it was a whole ceremony. He would come to my house, cry for hours. I would listen to everything that happened, and then in a few weeks, he would try again with Amber. No matter what I said, no matter what I did, it was a total waste of time because in the end, he would do what he wanted, and everything would start over. The worst part is that the first time, he at least had friends to talk to, although not many, including the last man Amber cheated with. But the last time, he had fewer friends and was at my house from the time I got off work until almost bedtime, only leaving because I told him I needed to sleep, since I had to get up very early for work the next day. Even then, Ethan continued talking about the problems he had with Amber, how she was with him, and all the good things she did for him. So usually, he stayed 1 or 2 hours past the time I normally went to bed. In the end, after 3 weeks, he talked to Amber again, and they resolved. So, it may sound bad to say this, but it was a complete waste of my time. I understand the pain someone goes through when they've been cheated on, but it should be a sign to end that relationship, especially if it happens a second time. But that's Ethan for you. But back to the present. 2 years have passed since the second infidelity, and to be honest, I don't think their marriage has improved much. They still have constant ups and downs, and I feel that Ethan lives in constant anxiety and distrust, which isn't surprising given everything that's happened. Well, last weekend, Ethan called me crying, inconsolable, telling me that once again Amber had cheated on him, this time with the neighbor next door. He was devastated and asked if he could come over to talk. But the truth is, I no longer have the patience or the strength to be there for him every time this happens. I feel like Ethan refuses to see reality and make the decisions he needs to make, get out of this toxic situation. Every time I comfort him and he cheers up to forgive Amber, I feel like I'm complicit in his emotional self-harm. So this time I firmly told him not to come over, that he had to face this situation on his own and make the decisions he thought were necessary for his well-being. I told him I supported him, but I couldn't keep comforting him every time Amber hurt him. Ethan got furious with me and told me I was a bad sister for not being there for him in his time of greatest need. Our parents also scolded me for not being there for my little brother. Yes, those were my parents' words, even though he's a 29-year-old man. I might understand if he had suffered his first heartbreak at 15, but he's an adult. He doesn't need to come to my house to talk to me. He needs to see a lawyer to divorce that serial cheater and move on with his life. I'm willing to help him in any way necessary, but only if he takes the right path. And don't think I'm closed-minded. if he wanted an open marriage and to let Amber be with other people, that's his problem. I might not agree with it, but if it makes him happy, I'm not one to tell him not to continue with it. But it's clear that this whole situation doesn't make him happy. And although he hasn't consented to an open marriage, that's essentially what Amber is doing. However, I'm here to ask if I should have comforted him anyway, or did I do the right thing by setting boundaries in this toxic situation? I think I'm right, but I also want to hear advice from people who have dealt with a similar situation, like a family member or friend who doesn't want to listen to their advice regarding infidelity. For example, a friend of mine told me when I asked about this that she had a similar situation, but with a friend whose boyfriend was cheating on her. And she found out. But when she wanted to tell her friend, the friend not only didn't believe her, but also cut her out of her life, even though my friend was very sure of what she had seen. Edit. I don't know if this is relevant. Some people have asked about my relationship with Amber. It's a normal relationship between sisters-in-law. We're not close friends, but we don't have a bad relationship either. The only problem I have with her is that she's unfaithful, and I hate unfaithful people. Which also puts me in a difficult position because if I comfort Ethan and say something bad about Amber that she deserves, there's nothing to stop him from reconciling with her again, which is very likely to happen. And that could turn against me. I'd rather avoid any drama, as something like this happened during her first infidelity, and it made family gatherings between us very uncomfortable. So during her second infidelity, I tried to just nod and say things like, "Everything will get better," as after hours and hours of the same thing, there's not much more to say. Update 1. First of all, I want to thank everyone who took the time to comment and give their opinions on my situation. Reading your advice and especially your experiences has made me feel better. Moreover, the general consensus has been that I did the right thing by not continuing to affirm my brother's behavior, so I wasn't the bad one in this whole situation. After my last post, I can tell you that, as I feared, Ethan got back together with Amber after about 2.5 weeks, despite my efforts to make him understand that this relationship is toxic and harmful to him. Ethan simply can't or won't see reality. I told him this during the other 2 infidelities, and I told him again when he called me the last time. It deeply hurts me to see him continue to sink into this cycle of deceit and betrayal. I know I love him and only want the best for him, but sometimes I feel like it's like trying to draw water from a bottomless well or a sinking ship. But the truth is, I can't keep being Ethan's emotional crutch every time Amber hurts him. I feel that by doing so, all I'm doing is prolonging his suffering and preventing him from making the decisions he really needs to make to heal and rebuild his life. I know my position may seem harsh or insensitive, but I assure you it's not. I love my brother, and it pains me deeply to see him go through all of this. But I believe that sometimes the true act of love is to tell things as they are, no matter how painful. In fact, it's not easy for me, as since I refused to comfort him that last time, Ethan has stopped talking to me. And so have our parents. I suppose they're still upset with me for not being there to support him. So even though I haven't had contact with Ethan or my parents since then, I stand by my position. I will continue to be here for him when he's ready to hear the truth and take control of his life, but I will no longer be his shoulder to cry on every time Amber betrays him. I firmly believe that this will only keep hurting him more. I suppose this resolves my problem, at least for now, until Ethan is cheated on again, which usually happens every 2 or 3 years. Update 2. Last night, I received a call from my mother. It was a very intense conversation where we deeply discussed everything that has been happening with my brother Ethan and his marriage to Amber. At first, my mother was very angry with me for not going to comfort Ethan when he asked me to. She said that I should be there for him in such difficult times, no matter how many times Amber has cheated on him. She blamed me for being a bad sister and not supporting my little brother. I tried to make her understand my point of view, explaining that while I understand Ethan's suffering, by continuing to comfort him every time this happens, I'm only keeping him trapped in a toxic cycle. I told her that I firmly believe that, over time, Ethan has to make the decision to end this relationship for his own good. After much discussion, my mother finally admitted that I might be right. She agreed that the situation can't continue like this, and that Ethan needs to wake up and see the reality of what Amber is doing to him. She recognized that by blindly supporting him, we might have been doing even more harm to him. However, the one who is still not convinced is my father. He insists that we should be there for Ethan, no matter how many times he goes back to Amber. He says that as a family, it's our duty to support him and not leave him alone in these moments. I tried to make him understand that sometimes true support is not comforting but confronting. That if we really want to help Ethan, we need to be brave and face him with the reality, no matter how harsh it may be. My father refuses to listen. In the end, my mother told me that she understands my position and believes I did the right thing by refusing to comfort Ethan that last time. She asked me to stay firm in my decision, and that she trusts that, over time, my father will also understand that this is the best thing for Ethan. I know this situation is still very complicated, and I still don't have contact with Ethan, but I feel a bit more relieved knowing that at least my mother is starting to understand my perspective. My father is a different story, but that's because probably my brother has always been closer to my father, and I with my mother. That's because they've always gone fishing or to the park, while my mother and I have been closer in women-related things. Edit. Many are asking if my mother has been unfaithful to my father, and my father forgave her, which Ethan might be following as a pattern. And no, my mother hasn't cheated on my father. I'm sure of that, even though Amber's infidelities have strained the relationship she had with my mother. Although my mother has always tried to mediate everything, she has made an effort to get along with Amber after the incidents, because at the end of the day, no one wants to get involved in someone else's relationship. It just hurts us to see him suffer, and we only want the best for him. That's why my mother wants us to be there for my brother, because although this hurts her, she doesn't want us to leave him alone either. Update 3. It's been about 2 months since my last post, and I must say that things have taken an even more complicated turn regarding my brother Ethan's situation. For starters, I can tell you that Amber's latest infidelity wasn't just a simple occasional slip-up. According to what Ethan has told us, Amber is actually in love with their neighbor and wants to leave the marriage to be with him. I know this because Ethan now lives at our parents' house. I'll talk about more later. First of all, Ethan explained to me that when he discovered the infidelity a few months ago, he had noticed some strange things, like coming home and finding the neighbor inside. Nothing strange, just talking with Amber in the living room, but given Amber's history, Ethan was suspicious. So Ethan decided to check Amber's phone as soon as he could, and that's where he found a series of messages proving that Amber and the neighbor were indeed having a secret love affair. There were only a few messages because he said it was clear she had been deleting the conversation, but it was clear what was going on. He immediately confronted her and was able to confirm the truth. That's where my story begins, because he called me to say he wanted to come to my house to talk. But after that, they followed the same pattern where he leaves the house. Amber harasses him for a few weeks, and he ends up going back to her. But after living together again for a while, Amber told him one day that she was actually in love with the neighbor and didn't want to try to fix things between them. She wanted a divorce. Ethan was devastated and tried to convince Amber to give their marriage another chance, but she stood firm in her decision. Finally, a week ago, Ethan moved into our parents' house because Amber told him she wasn't going to stop seeing this neighbor while the divorce was pending. The worst part is that it seems to be a no-fault state, which means Ethan won't be able to divorce her on the grounds of infidelity. This is going to complicate things a lot because Amber will be entitled to half of all the assets they've accumulated during their marriage. I know all this because my mother told me. I still haven't talked to Ethan, although my father and I have spoken a few times, and now I can say he's on my side. On the other hand, my mother thinks that now I should go visit him and comfort him, but I still have my doubts. I mean, he's going to get divorced, but not because Ethan decided to, but because he has no choice. If I find out anything new, I'll post another update. Update 4. It's been a few weeks since my last update, and I must say that things with Ethan have gotten even worse. A few days ago, I finally decided to go visit my brother at our parents' house. I just couldn't stay away any longer, knowing the terrible time he's going through. When I arrived, the sight that greeted me broke my heart. Ethan was a complete mess. He looked unkempt, had a few days' worth of beard, and it was clear he hadn't slept well in weeks. He looked like a ghost of himself. When he saw me, Ethan threw himself into my arms and broke down in tears. Through sobs, he told me I was right, that Amber was a liar and a manipulator who had only hurt him over and over again. He thanked me for not encouraging him to forgive her this time and for setting boundaries. Honestly, at that moment, I was very tempted to say, "I told you so," but I held back. There was no point in kicking a man who was already down. I know this community loves revenge, but it wouldn't make me any happier to do it. He hadn't done anything wrong to me, other than being a crying nuisance. Ethan was suffering terribly, and he didn't need me to rub in his face that I had been right all along. Instead, I hugged him tightly and tried to give him all my support and comfort. I told him I was deeply sorry for everything he was going through, but that now the important thing was for him to focus on healing and rebuilding his life. I told him that the best thing I could do now as his sister was to help him find a good lawyer. I know some, but they don't handle divorce cases. But I'm sure they can refer me to one. I know Amber wants to keep the house and that even the neighbor is living there now. I told Ethan he should go back there because that's his house. He can't keep being Amber's doormat and letting her get away with everything. While the divorce isn't finalized, he needs to go back there and reclaim it. If she wants to be with the other man, she can do it somewhere else or wait until after the divorce. I also told him he should fight for the house, because given the neighborhood they live in, the house is worth more than the other assets they have. And I know he's been contributing more to the mortgage, because it's one of the things that have come up in the times I've comforted him in the past. For now, I don't know what Ethan will do with all this, but I'm more than willing to help him with the situation if that's what's needed. Although I won't deny that I like the idea of confronting a cheater like Amber, especially now that I never have to see her face again. Update 5. Well, get ready because this is going to be a bit long since Ethan and I went to his house and confronted Amber. We went last Saturday morning because we knew the neighbor wouldn't be there since he works. We did it this way because it seemed much easier to avoid things getting violent somehow, although that wasn't our biggest problem that day. But what happened when we arrived and tried to open the door? We couldn't. He didn't work. So we knocked on the door and shouted for Amber to open up, because we knew she was there since her car was parked in the driveway. Finally, she answered, but didn't open the door because, according to her, it was her house now, though there was no reason for Ethan to be there, which was funny because there were still some of my brother's things in the house. When Ethan left, he only took some clothes but left many belongings, which we later found out Amber had put in boxes and stored in the garage. We tried to negotiate with her to let us in, but when she wouldn't listen to reason, we had to call the police. After about 30 minutes, a patrol car arrived, and we explained everything that had happened. Luckily, the lawyer I spoke to before we went to Ethan's house advised us to go to the county registrar and look for proof of who owned the property. And since it was in both Ethan and Amber's names, it was easy to prove that it was also Ethan's house. So the police officers knocked on the door, and after introducing themselves, she opened the door and tried to explain her side of the situation. But since she didn't have much legal basis for it, one of the officers told her she could make things easy and let Ethan in or go the hard way. Finally, she agreed to let us in. Also, one of the officers asked her to give Ethan a copy of the key so he could make a copy himself. We could see that there were things inside that weren't Ethan's and that clearly belonged to the neighbor, as it wasn't something Amber would use, golf clubs. That's when we also found out that Ethan's things had been moved to the garage instead of being in his room. Ethan told Amber that if she wanted to live with the neighbor, she could move to his house or wait until after the divorce. Amber said she wasn't going to do any of that because the house was hers now. But I told her that unless she could pay half the property's value, the house would have to be sold or let Ethan buy it. That's the good thing about seeing a lawyer beforehand. She thought her half of the assets would be the house, but it's not like they have other assets to divide, so she was being a bit optimistic about. Ethan didn't want to continue paying the mortgage without being able to live in the house, and she isn't in a position to pay the mortgage alone, so we were at an impasse. After a few hours of arguing with Amber, she agreed to let Ethan live in the guest room, but the neighbor couldn't live there with them. I don't think it's the ideal situation, but for their situation, it's the best they can do at the moment. Paying rent and the mortgage on the house wouldn't be fair to Ethan. As for the house, I don't know, because they couldn't agree on what will happen to it after the divorce. I know Ethan doesn't want it, but he also can't live with our parents while the divorce is ongoing, and leaving the house when his name is on the mortgage and Amber not paying it isn't convenient for him either. I think the best thing is to sell it. But it's not my marriage, and it's not my house. When I know more about that, I'll probably update for those who might be interested. Although if no one in the comments asks, I won't do another update on the subject. But back to this. We were discussing some details when the neighbor arrived, and things got a bit heated. First, he asked what Ethan was doing there and who I was. But after we answered, he didn't want to leave the house. Ethan told him he had half an hour to get his things or he would throw them out. And Amber was saying to give him more time, all while the neighbor was shouting that he wasn't going to leave the house because he was now with Amber, and she no longer loved Ethan. Ethan said he could call the police again and preferred to go that route, and Amber said there was no need to do that. I'm telling it simply and succinctly, but the moment was chaotic and annoying because this guy was very annoying. I don't know what Amber saw in him because my brother can be called many names, as people have called him in the comments. Compared to this man, there's no comparison. This man is ugly and quite disrespectful. Anyway, to cut the story short, the neighbor packed his things and left. Luckily, things didn't get physical or anything like that, although I wanted to punch him in the face. He's one of those people who generate an uncontrollable urge to slap them, but I held back. Then we left with Ethan, me to my house and him to our parents' house to get his things and return to his house. He's been living there, and from what I know, the neighbor hasn't visited. I know he can go anyway when Ethan is at work or whatever, but at least he doesn't live there. Update 6. Before I start, I must respond to everyone who said Ethan would go back to Amber, but that didn't happen. I had my doubts too, especially in the final stages of the divorce. Here we are. It's good to see that my brother has seen Amber for what she really is, although it was very late. To start with, since there's a lot to tell, Amber and the neighbor are no longer together. I don't know what happened between them, and I don't want to ask or know. That's why I was worried that Ethan might fall back with her, but it hasn't happened. I guess miracles exist, and before the divorce was finalized, she begged him to get back together, that she still loved him and all that. Ethan told her no. I don't know the details of that conversation beyond what he told me, but at least the divorce is finalized. The house was finally sold, for those who are asking, and it was sold before the divorce was finalized. The rest of the assets were divided in half, although Ethan received a bit more from the sale of the house since he contributed more to the mortgage. Although I don't rule out that she agreed to that arrangement just to get him back. I don't know the exact details of the divorce, and I haven't asked. I'm just happy that all this is over. As for selling the house beforehand, I think it was the best thing because Ethan could move out and didn't have to live there with his ex, which was a very toxic environment. It was during that stage, after the house was sold, that Amber broke up with her boyfriend and started looking for Ethan. I have my suspicions that the house had something to do with all this, but they are just that, suspicions. I'm proud that my brother has finally opened his eyes and hope he keeps them open in the future, especially when he meets someone new. If not, I'll be here again to complain about my brother.